Good morning, everybody. It is midnight here on the East Coast of America. I am RJ, and this is Crazy News Reacts. Welcome aboard. Today, we're talking about Rikers Island, the biggest jail in America, which holds more than 3,000 prisoners, pre-trial, and those serving 1 year. It is besieged by hundreds of problems and has been engulfed in violence since 2020. So come along and let me explain to you why this is a travesty.
두 눈을 감아 가만히 더 느껴봐 기분 좋은 긴장감 내게 말해줘 tonight 널 알고 싶
Rikers Island, New York's massive jail complex just a few miles from Midtown Manhattan and scene of a humanitarian crisis. Benji Lozano recently spent 5 months in Rikers, serving the remaining sentence from a 1997 assault conviction after his recent parole from decades in state prison on a separate conviction.
What do you see in these pictures?
I see myself. I see everything that I experienced while I was at Rikers Island. I see inhumane conditions.
Island consists of 10 jails, and it is the #1 most dangerous jail in New York State. And this is a place where 80% of the people are just awaiting trial. They have not been found guilty, therefore, they're presumed innocent. So why are they dying?
Photos obtained by the New York Post last fall show detainees jammed in the intake area. Lozano says he spent weeks living like this.
Feces all over the wall, unoperable restrooms. Toilets would not flush, the sinks would not work. It was disgusting.
And you might be surprised who agrees with him.
People were living in inhumane conditions.
Until last month, Vincent Schiraldi was in charge of Rikers Island.
No recreation, health care was not available to people because we couldn't get them to their doctor's appointments. People weren't making court appointments on time.
Now, before we go believe in Schiraldi, we have to keep in mind, he was the top boss there, and he didn't change any of these problems while he was in charge. But now he wants to come forward and sound the siren about condition. I mean, human beings are living worse than pigs, piled on top of each other for days at a time before they're even processed. This place is a living hell. I was there back in the 80s in C-74. That was one of the worst, most violent units. And what I saw there, I'm sure, has contributed to my PTSD. I don't even want to go into detail about the things I've experienced there. Just consider the worst hell. And Rikers is way down below the earth.
Violence, he says, was rampant.
What would you say is the percentage of prisoners who have weapons?
You know, there were several units that were unstaffed completely. There was no correctional officer physically in the unit. And I can't remember looking under a sheet or a mattress and not seeing a shank under one of them. Because frankly, anybody would want one to keep themselves protected because there was no correctional officer to keep them protected.
Absolutely. Everyone in this jail has a shank because it's better to be caught with one than end up dead because you didn't have one. And that was a very real fear and still is more than 40 years after I was there.
NBC News recently obtained more than 100 hours of surveillance video from inside Rikers. Scenes like this, an attempted knifing averted by an officer, and an inmate-organized so-called fight night where some detainees were forced to participate.
Who was running the place?
The inmates run the facilities.
The footage came to light as part of a lawsuit brought by the New York County Defender Services on behalf of a client awaiting trial, who argued he should be released because of the unsafe conditions inside Rikers. In a groundbreaking decision in December, a judge agreed, finding the city's Department of Correction utterly failed to prevent the crisis at Rikers Island.
And it's hard to get a handle on just how many people have died there. The city does not release information on that, claiming that it's a matter of HIPAA, medical privacy. But when asked just for the pure numbers of how many had died, how many had been stabbed, nothing. However, the lawyers have constructed a list of about 120 people who have died in Rikers. Causes unknown because they will not release that information. And when when they do release reports, it looks like a CIA memo with almost everything redacted. Why? What are they trying to hide? In fact, only 68 people have been reported dead in Rikers. But we know, because of the numbers I just gave you, that's not true. They continue to lie and cover up, and nobody still is doing anything about the horrid condition.
I wrote to all the judges and all the district attorneys and said, I cannot guarantee the safety of people that get sent here.
Dangerous to inmates and for jail staff?
It was dangerous for everyone who was in there, for the medical staff, for the correctional officers, and for the people who are incarcerated there.
It's worth noting the majority of those being held at Rikers are awaiting trial and presumed innocent.
They're treated worse than many prisons in which people are fully convicted.
Was it possible to come to a place like Rikers and melt in and not be affected by any of this?
I don't see how that's possible. I mean, some people are heroes and they can withstand no matter what you throw at them, but the vast majority of people left Rikers worse off than when they came in.
To be fair, every jail or prison that people go to changes their entire dynamic. They think differently, they learn new crimes, they are victims of violence or the perpetrators of such. Sending people to jail, you have to keep in mind, you are causing a more violent individual. Now, I'm not saying jails aren't needed, because they are, but we can do something about the conditions so that when these people are released into our communities, they are not filled with violence, rage, and anger. But nobody cares. So it's just become Pigpen.
A court-appointed federal monitor of Rikers recently reporting conditions have progressively and substantially worsened. Schiraldi says one of the most pressing problems, a union contract that gives officers unlimited sick time. He points out that of the more than 7,000 officers at Rikers, up to a third don't show up on any given day. For 6 years, Serena Townsend was in charge of investigating misconduct at the jail.
Was there a pattern of misconduct that you noted during your time there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. With respect to sick leave abuse, that was happening on a rampant level. People were calling out sick, and then when we would go and check on them, they were not actually at home sick, they were out. Once we started ramping up the investigations into the sick leave abuse, they just stopped calling completely.
In your job, if you did not show up for 4 months out of the year, what do you think would happen? You'd be dismissed, fired, let go. Nobody puts up with that kind of bullshit. And to allow that to happen when you are dealing with a lot of mentally ill inmates, people who are very sick, and the victims of violent offenders, you, Mr. Schiraldi, are responsible for that because you didn't change the mindset there. You didn't change conditions, but now that you're out, you want to be a whistleblower. Come on, man.
In January, Townsend was fired by the newly appointed commissioner after she says he instructed her to get rid of 2,000 disciplinary cases against officers within 100 days, and she refused. The city denies Townsend's claims.
I investigated every type of act of misconduct. I also investigated every death of an inmate. And I have to say that a lot of what I saw in those cases are things that are happening that could have been prevented if we had staff in the jails. A staffing crisis, it permeates through the jails on every level. It causes people to potentially lose their lives, but it also causes searches to not happen.
There you have it. It's very clear. She was fired because she wouldn't be a part of the cover-up. Imagine that. The new commissioner refusing to hold staff accountable for their actions when the inmates are constantly brought before disciplinary hearings because of what they do. Does it seem fair? I don't know. What do you think? Put it down in the comments. I would say she knew too much and they wanted to get rid of her to prevent her from spilling the beans, possibly as a whistleblower. As for safety, that doesn't exist. Come on. In the zoo, if you put all the animals together, what happens? It's the same thing with humanity, especially those put into a place all together where it's like gladiator school.
Benny Bossio, the union president representing officers, accuses Townsend of being overzealous in her discipline of officers who were trying to do an impossible job.
I mean, look, we have officers that are out sick. 1,500 correction officers have been assaulted in the last year. We have officers dealing with long-term effects of COVID, being sexually assaulted. So, you know, this notion that we're out on purpose is just nonsense.
There have been accusations, however, that there has been an abuse of a sick leave policy that essentially is unlimited, which you apparently negotiated.
Come on, Benny, really? You are the president of the union. Your job is to protect those members within your association. It's funny how you will release numbers when it comes to officers, but you won't release the deaths and other information of the inmates. Why not? What's being hidden here, folks? I'd love to hear your comment. Saying that officers are just trying to do their job, while a third of them don't show up every day? Come on. A lot of them were found to be perfectly fine when investigators went around to find out if they were really sick or hurt, and they'd be mowing the lawn, they'd be out chopping stuff up. You know, this is not fiction. It's happened. They've been caught. I remember guards creating sort of like a fight club. If the cop didn't like you, or the guard didn't like you, he would take one of his toughest prisoners who he got along with, and he would send that person at you to give you a chin check, which means basically a beat down, to teach you a lesson to listen to the officer or do what he says and basically just be a bitch.
Inmates are assaulting us with impunity, and there are no consequences or deterrents in place.
How would you describe the conditions at Rikers Island?
The conditions at Rikers Island have been inhumane. You know, not fixing the infrastructure, cell doors not being able to lock, not hiring correction officers in over 3 years, housing inmates by gang affiliation where you have one officer on the floor with 50 inmates. So they really put us at a huge disadvantage.
Finger pointing aside, everyone agrees that Rikers is horribly broken.
Did you see that guy with the knife holding it down on his right side? Take a look at this right here. See that? That is a huge knife that will go right through you. And the reason why they house prisoners by gang affiliation is very simple. If you house a Blood with a Crip, or Blood Crip with Southerners, or Mexican Mafia, or any other gang, they will fight each other and kill each other. So you don't have a choice. You have to house them together, because if you house gangs together, they're in the same type of family. So they don't attack each other, and it offers a safer jail. He doesn't tell you that. As for having no officers on the floor, or one officer for 50 inmates, come on, forget about it. The question I would have, why haven't you fixed it? As for the officers being at a disadvantage, what do you think about the inmates being at a disadvantage? All those knives, all the rapes, all the murders. You're talking about the staff? Really?
You did 25 years in a penitentiary. Was anything you experienced in prison as bad as what you experienced at Rikers?
I've experienced a lot of horrible things, but I think that was probably the most frustrating and the most upsetting thing I've ever experienced.
We as corrections officials should be apologizing for our role in mass incarceration, and I do apologize for that. It's been a terrible public policy. It hasn't achieved safety.
In a statement, a City Hall spokesperson tells NBC News in the month since new Corrections Commissioner Louis Molina took over, more than 1,000 officers have returned to work. In-person programming has resumed, and the statement says many of our officers have begun working normal hours again.
Everything is just coming up roses now. The entire place is fixed because of that guy. Wow. Murders are still up. Rapes are still up. Doors still don't lock. You have an amazing amount of staff that still don't show up, regardless of what he says. Nothing has changed in Rikers since 1988, when I was familiar with the place. It is just as dangerous now as it was then, and for anybody to say something different, I think is ignorant. Well, what do you guys think? I'm RJ Smith, and this, of course, has been Crazy News Reacts. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that when you come back tomorrow, you will be a subscriber. Yay! See ya.